one is as crooked as a dog's hind leg.
Welcome to Rumpled, Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast for all your Columbo needs. I'm Rich Nocella, and I'm here with my sister,
Adrian Nocella.
And this week's episode is Death Lends a Hand from 1971, starring Robert Culp as Mr. Brimmer, investigator, Ray Milland as Arthur Kennicott, a newspaper mogul, his wife, the victim, Patricia Crawley, starring as Lenore Kennicott, and Eric James as a gossiping fishmonger who would have been fired 10 minutes into his first day of work.
I'm so glad you included him in the cast because he's my favorite in this entire episode.
He is so... like, if you wanted somebody who would absolutely rat you out for murder, this is the guy.
He's the star of the episode. To remind everybody what he looks like, he's sort of like a boyish Mark Hamill type.
Yeah.
I would say that he's just, and he's an imp. What a little imp this guy is.
He's a little imp. So he actually is in one of the very first scenes, because the whole episode starts, the very first thing we see is a shooting target, and we see Robert Culp as Mr. Brimmer, who, by the way, also does not get a first name this entire episode. He's always either Mr. Brimmer or Investigator Brimmer, but he has a gun in each hand, and he's firing both of them, both to show us that he's ambidextrous, but also... This was long before all of the John Woo movies, so dual wielding weapons was almost unheard of. This is maybe the first time, certainly that I'd ever seen somebody hold a gun in each hand and shooting.
Well, I would think that he'd have a lot more fun than he was showing us, because if I got to shoot double guns, I would be shouting yeehaw, like it would be the time of my life. And it's just filled with tension already. That's really how already the episode starts with him shooting double guns, and it's not fun.
No, he's very mechanical and methodical. He's choosing his shots very carefully, and it's purely to assess how well they shoot. Like, I think he says, "Oh, this one's more crooked than a hound dog's hind leg," or something.
Yeah,
yeah. So and then he abruptly leaves that and walks with good old Mr. Denning, who gives him a brief rundown, because Robert Culp, he's an ex-cop who's in charge of an entire detective agency that's this almost huge conglomerate. He's really built himself up. His first appointment of the day is with Ray Milland, Arthur Kennicott, the newspaper mogul, and he tells Arthur Kennicott, who hired him to see if his wife was having an affair, that his wife was not having an affair. Arthur Kennicott is very happy about that and feels foolish for suspecting his wife and leaves. And then we see that Robert Culp goes into the room where Arthur's wife, Lenore, was sitting, overhearing the entire conversation, and he confirms for us, the audience, that she was really having an affair and that he lied to her husband about it for the sole purpose of blackmailing her to get Arthur Kennicott's contacts and information. And she at some point even says, "Hey, how many other famous people's wives owe you favors?"
Right.
So again, we're about 16 minutes BC before Columbo. This is the whole start of the episode. He gives her that ultimatum. He lets her think about it for a little bit, and she shows up in his beach house. And I guess we've got a lot to talk about here with that, because for a head of a detective agency, he leaves the door unlocked. He's shocked that the woman he tried to blackmail would actually show up in his house. And she tells him, "Not going to do it. Sorry, not only am I not going to be blackmailed by you, I'm going to rat myself out to my husband and tell him that you lied to him and how you do your business, and he will destroy you."
Right.
So she tries to leave after delivering that. He gets angry and grabs her. She shoves him away. He falls against a picture on the wall and breaks it, and he loses his mind and throws a backhanded fist at her.
Yeah. He backhanded, closed fist punched a woman in the face.
Yes.
That's what he did.
So, yes, anger issues, we got a few. So she falls in slow motion, hits her head on a glass table, shattering it, and she's dead.
There's a lot to unpack here. So,
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack here because first off, I just want to say this. This is my favorite episode of Columbo.
Yeah.
This is by far my favorite episode of Columbo. When we would always talk family Columbo in the household, everyone would go around and talk about their favorite episodes and everyone would list theirs. This is my favorite episode. But it wasn't until we had this podcast that I had to really think about why this is my favorite Columbo.
Uh-huh.
I had to think about it for our discussion, and it really came to me that this is the exact content I adore, because this episode is essentially the formula for every Coen Brothers movie of all time.
Oh, okay.
Where someone has a plan, it's a pretty bad plan, right? So you have a plan, it's a bad plan. It goes from bad to worse to just instant catastrophe. It's
Right.
not a little slow burn. It's not like, oh, I can see some signs, maybe we shouldn't do this. It's just, I have a plan, it's a bad one. It went from bad to worse to just a horror show. And now I'm just spending the rest of my time cleaning up this mess that I've made.
Yeah.
And, this catastrophe. And so the Coen Brothers, depending on whichever film you're watching, it's either darkly funny or very darkly serious. This is a very serious episode of Columbo. But I just think it has all those elements where, again, let's talk about Inspector Brimmer. I don't know how he got to be the head of this security and investigative detective agency. He is horrible at his job. I don't know how you're unaware that the very person you've been tailing to see if she has an affair has a beach house a mile away from you.
Yeah, there's that for sure.
I gotta be honest with you. She was able to surprise him at his home in his beach house because she's like, oh, we're neighbors. I can walk to your home. I'm a mile away. And I gotta be honest with you, Rich, the most famous person from my hometown is like Lori Loughlin, and I know where her childhood home is. And like, I'm not surveilling her, and she's not world famous. I mean, Kennicott is essentially like a William Randolph Hearst type
Absolutely.
mogul.
I mean, that level of fame, you would almost have to think of, without politics involved, but like a Murdoch.
Okay, or like a Bezos, right? Like a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk, just like a superstar stratosphere, just a hugely influential, powerful man is who this is. Yeah. And you've been hired by him, and you still don't know that he owns property a mile away
from your house.
And you've been trailing her for personal reasons, not for publication reasons. So he's terrible at his job. Clearly, Brimmer has never played a chess game ever, because there was no other conceivable outcome. He didn't think of any other outcome.
Because
proposed.
He didn't think that she would say no. He didn't have a plan B. Because once he told Ray Milland, once he told Kennicott, your wife is not having an affair, and then he says, okay, now I told him you're not having an affair, now I'm going to blackmail you, give me all this information, and she says no, what's he going to do? Say, oh, by the way, I'm completely incompetent when I thought she wasn't having an affair, or I lied right to your face because I hoped to blackmail your wife. There's no, the moment he told him that, and the moment she said no, he should have just dropped the whole thing. That was his time to just say, you know what, this was a terrible idea. And like you say, in every Coen Brothers movie, there's always that last possible second that they could get out of it, but they never take it because then there'd be no movie.
Right. And that's what happened here. So I just laughed that this guy who's supposed to just be so, I mean, he's clearly tightly wound. We saw that, because who wouldn't enjoy shooting double guns? So like, he's very tightly wound. He's full of rage at any moment. And I have to say, it was a little scary when she went to leave and Brimmer kicked that door closed. Yes. I have to tell you, that was actually, I was like, ooh, he's a good actor.
Kind of almost
very
triggering.
Scary. Yeah. It was a little triggery. So it was really intense. It was really, really, really scary. And I do think he's just an angry, angry guy. And he's so in control, and he never anticipated that this little powerhouse skin diving housewife with visible panty lines was going to like outsmart him. And she did. And she actually, she made a mistake. I admire this character because, she made a mistake. She knew it was wrong. She was willing and ready to assume responsibility for the affair to her own detriment. She had enough respect for her husband to not trade in his secrets that would really dismantle his organization to save herself.
Yep.
And she removed, as she said, it's all about leverage. She removed the leverage from the situation, and Brimmer didn't see it coming. I don't know how you don't see something coming like that somebody might choose no, but he didn't.
Well, I think when you're that used to being in control, and you're that used to everybody just obeying your every wish, and he's thinking to himself, well, it would make sense. She got out of a jam. She'll want to help me so she doesn't get put back in a jam. And he clearly didn't anticipate a woman saying, you know what? I would rather face the consequences, even if it meant a divorce, than to continue to betray my husband. It's bad enough that I betrayed him once, but I'm not going to continue to betray him just so that I don't get into trouble. He just didn't see that coming. And I guess her mistake was doing it in person, but she had no way of knowing he was such a hothead with such a short fuse. And she probably wanted the satisfaction of saying it to his face, too. I'm sure there's a little of that.
There's probably something to that. She probably stormed over there real angry and insulted herself. Like, how dare you think you're going to come into my family? But it was a real bad idea to go there without anybody knowing that you're there, to confront a full-grown man by yourself.
That's right.
And in a beach where there's, not a lot of property about at night.
That's right, at night. And so, of course, when he strikes her, she falls and hits her head. And now this is kind of interesting from a 1970s television show point of view. You see this almost beautiful shower of glass fall. Yes. While we're looking at him, and it kind of twinkles in the light as it falls down in slow motion. And in that split second, he realized what he did, because this was one of the few unintentional murders. This was a reflex from a very angry, violent man who certainly had no intention of killing her. But of course, he hit her in the face. She struck her head on glass, and there's no way they're showing her face, and they actually don't for the rest of the entire episode. You don't see it, because it would be probably a little bit too gruesome if they were being realistic about it. And if you notice, it's almost comical that her head is always behind something from that point of view. We're seeing him kneel down and take a pulse, and her head is behind a leg of the couch. And then when we go to the great scene that I know we're going to talk about in about 30 seconds, where he's wearing those huge glasses, her head is off the view of his glasses.
See, I thought her head was just, I thought her whole, in my memory of this episode, that her body is just enveloped by that green shag carpet.
Not quite. No, she's laying on.
Okay, so you can say, because in my memory, you don't even,
just fine.
You can say, because in my memory, it's like, because that carpet is like, it really is just like Oscar the Grouch. Like,
it is.
Yeah.
It is. Maybe not quite as green, but it is absolutely... It is Oscar the Grouch flayed and laid flat like an Oscar the Grouch rug, and they're covering her head almost like they would cover a woman's stomach if they didn't want the audience to know she was pregnant with a hat or something like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm making too much of it.
No, but I think you're right. I think that it's a little probably gruesome for 1971. It's hard enough to walk around in all the outfits that they were wearing. Maybe they just wanted to give everybody a break.
It probably would have been hard enough for somebody to get into that rug anyway to put makeup on.
Yeah.
So he, of course, wraps her up in a rug, drives her away. But before we get to that, we have that wonderful scene where instead of doing what they would normally do, which is to show you him cleaning up the crime scene, they show you him cleaning up the crime scene, but with a big, super up-close picture of his face, and he's wearing really large square glasses. And so each frame of the glass has essentially a video showing us him cleaning up the crime scene. But it's not at the same time. He's doing different things in each eye. So they really probably took about 10 minutes worth of what would have been showing him cleaning a crime scene and did it in just maybe 3 or 4, but in a very artistic way.
That's a very, I loved it, but it's a very heavy-handed 1970s cinematography sort of choice to make, or editing or directorial choice to make, where it was each lens depicted a different montage of him just cleaning up, like you said, the crime scene. And I think at some point they slowly start to meet in the middle.
They do.
Where, so, on one lens you see him sort of like wiping down for fingerprints, and then the other lens you see him cleaning up around the crime scene itself. And they just sort of kind of meet in the middle, where he ultimately, I guess, puts her in the trunk of his car.
Yeah, well, it ends with him taking her rings off to make it look
Right.
like a robbery, and then we
Right.
see him driving out. But they did at least give him, and I do like when they give the killers some credit for intelligence, because he was wiping fingerprints off the door where she had snuck in.
Yes.
But then you see him intentionally put his hands on it because
Right.
they should have his fingerprints on it.
Yes.
So he's wiping them off, but he knows it would look strange to have no prints on his door, so he puts his prints on. He does the same thing with the kitchen cabinet and anything
That's right.
else that
He
they
goes
might have
back and
touched.
says that because, he was a police officer himself. So
Right.
he would know what they would be looking for. And it'd be very odd if they dusted for prints and they found no prints.
Nothing. Right,
Right.
exactly. So that was good.
And he did that all to the score of just a really intense and angry cello. That was
Yes.
the music score for this part with a lot of strings. And then it was just a lot. It was like dueling cellos at one point.
At
It was
some
very
point,
heavy cello. Yeah.
yeah, it was really, it was letting us know, hey, this is serious. This is, this is what he's doing with the next few minutes of his life. Because like you
Right.
said, now his plan became absolutely nuclear catastrophic. And,
Yeah.
he went from trying to blackmail her to murdering her. So
It just
that's
didn't
about
go
as bad.
well.
That's about as bad as a plan can get.
Which again, maybe brings us back to one of my first life lessons from our father, which was to never blackmail anybody.
Oh, well, to be fair, wasn't that mom's thing? That was a big.
Was it? I feel like it was dad who was just like, Adrian, listen, don't be a rat and don't blackmail anyone. And I'm like 5. I'm like, got it. And I never have. I've held true to it to this day. And this is something that I learned while watching Columbo with our family at 5. I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
Because...
Well, no, I mean, that was absolutely a life lesson. Maybe I learned it from mom. I don't know earlier, possibly because she was always reading murder mysteries, and it's how I, as also a 5 and a 6-year-old, got into Agatha Christie, reading books with pictures of people with axes in their backs on the cover. We
both remember that same book. I remember that book too. Yes, it was always everywhere I went.
Yeah. So, but that's true. Nothing good ever happens to a blackmailer.
Yeah, that was seriously a refrain I learned when I was just basically in kindergarten, because Columbo was always rerun. That's how I watched it. Obviously, I wasn't, 1971. I wasn't around to watch it then, and so I would only really watch it on, like, I guess a Sunday or a Saturday afternoon when it would be on. We had the one TV in the house, and that's all. That this is it. There's no streaming. There's no pausing. There's no Nick Jr. There was no kids friendly. The 1980s were a very different time. So there was no real kid friendly programming except for a block of time on a Saturday.
Right.
Saturday mornings. It's just funny to me that I was like, one of the first things I remember Dad telling me is like, see, Adrian, this is why you don't blackmail people, because you're going to get murdered. And I'm like, okay.
So he was trying to blackmail her.
Yes.
And so she, I guess, and I don't know that she was technically trying to blackmail him, but she was basically going to expose the blackmail.
Basically,
so I don't know.
The lesson is nothing good comes from blackmail.
Yeah.
And I think we can all agree on that.
I think we can. Because there's several other episodes of Columbo where the blackmailer is either flat out killed or also, again, caught.
Right.
So he drops the body off in this remote place. And now Columbo enters the scene.
Yes, he does. This is a big, big, big entrance for Columbo.
Yes. Yeah, he's just driving up, kind of doing it along, just like, and he's pulled over by a motorcycle cop because his directional is broken.
Right.
And he's already been pulled over once that day.
Right.
He's telling the officer that he can go ahead and get his car fixed, but he's on his way to a murder.
Yes.
So the cop offers to give him an escort, and it's kind of my favorite little segment there is when he says, well, let me give you an escort so you don't keep getting pulled over. Mm-hmm. And by the way, your license is going to expire next week. And the Columbo says, all right, but not too fast. And you actually see the motorcycle accidentally pull a little further away from Columbo. That his motorcycle going slow, he still can't catch up with the motorcycle.
He can't keep up with it because the car is just ancient.
Yeah.
Yeah, the car's in bad shape. Columbo comes in just as a wreck, and the car is in bad shape, and he does. And so he gets the escort to the crime scene where I guess he meets all the other people there. He's looking around. He's actually just sort of looking for a match for the first part of that scene.
To the point where he actively is not listening to what's going on, to the point where the captain says, "I knew you weren't listening."
Yeah. And you know what makes me laugh about this? This episode is funny too, because as bad as Inspector Brimmer is, or Detective Brimmer is at his job, is as good as this coroner or medical examiner.
Yes.
Because in one sentence, he sums up exactly what happens. He says, they said, "Oh, Charlie," or whatever his name is, "what do you think happened?" He goes, "Well, it looks like she was hit and maybe struck her head on something, and then the body was moved here."
Yeah.
Which is exactly what happened.
I actually have that written down, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Is that it's the first, really the first, and maybe even the last time that a coroner just in one sentence describes everything that we just saw. I mean, he got it 100% right.
100%
Time
right.
of death, everything. It's like this guy needs his own show.
Yeah, I would watch that show.
He could have been Quincy, which was also part of the mystery lineup toward the end.
That's right.
Then I guess Columbo meets Kennicott, right? Because he brings him down to have the body identified, and then he talks to him at the hospital morgue.
And Ray Milland plays Arthur Kennicott, and he really just classes up the joint.
Yeah.
First of all, what a phenomenal actor Ray Milland is. I mean, he just emotes. I mean, he's really by far the only heart in this whole episode. I find it a pretty cold episode, all the characters.
Yes.
Everyone's pretty cold, and, except maybe you can make a defense for Lenore, but she really wasn't. She was the victim, so she was really not in it an awful lot.
No.
And everyone else is pretty straight-laced because they're in the business of being detectives and things like that. So
yeah, and Columbo wasn't golly geeing it so much this time as much as he was coming at Brimmer almost head on.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So I feel that, he really was the heart and the emotion of this episode, and he's really just such a phenomenal actor. I meant to look up, did he ever, I know he's had a huge, huge career before this point,
sure.
Obviously, but was he ever like an award winner? Did he ever win an Oscar or anything?
Gee, I'm not, I don't know. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, I would give him the Oscar for Best Columbo Sympathetic Widower. Is that a category that they still have now? Can we award it posthumously?
Posthumously awarded. Well, and fair too, because again, yes, I mean, he's an excellent actor. He both was able to convey that he's an absolutely no nonsense kind of guy, where at the same time just really having such a terrible time with the loss of his wife, but saying, well, look, I'll feel sorry for myself after you catch this guy for right now. And then he goes through a whole list of things like, look, I know I'm the husband, I'm the first suspect, here's what I did that night, rule me out, do whatever you have to do to rule me out, and then catch the real guy.
My guess is his alibi really is pocket square and ascot shopping, because he wears both at the same time throughout the entire episode, which is just a look that you don't see. So I appreciate it.
Yes. No, that's that is almost certainly true. Now, what I have to say that I liked is Columbo was, and this is kind of interesting how Columbo treats different people when he kind of gets a hunch as to who did what. Columbo was a perfectly normal cop with every scene with Kennicott.
Yes.
Until Brimmer shows up. And then all of a sudden he starts reading palms, he starts walking into closets,
That's really the only time in this entire episode where he is, sort of, shucks, I'm just a bashful, I don't really know my way around things type of detective.
But
so he's like Mr. Magoo,
Yes. Yeah. The moment he heard that Brimmer called to volunteer to help, all of a sudden he's like, oh, this changes everything. I have and Culp was so great in this too, because while he was fumbling around reading people's palms, he has this great expression on his face, Culp, where he's pushing his jaw out but pulling his lips up, like he could tell he's trying to suppress a smile or a smirk.
Yes.
But before that scene is over, even though he's bumbled into a closet, but he was very perceptive about wondering why she had one set of golf clubs at home and one at another place where she was getting lessons, but not at the place she played. It was all very fishy. So before Columbo actually found the right door and left, all of a sudden, Brimmer already knew this guy could be trouble. So it was a very
Yes.
wide range.
I agree. There was a lot of that because I said the same thing. I think the red flag for Columbo was, and again, Brimmer should know better. He was a police officer, but he did volunteer to offer his services to help find the murderer. And Columbo, I'm sure you noticed this, he asked, because when I rewatched it, Columbo asked Brimmer, or Kennicott, I guess, he said, oh, was this for the paper or was this for a personal matter? I don't think he just said it. I think Columbo just said, is this for the paper? And Brimmer responded, it was a personal matter. So that alone, I think at that point, Columbo was like, I now need to look at you, because if, just years of watching Law and Order have taught me anything, is that people like to insert themselves into an investigation if they've committed the crime. They like to keep tabs on it. So again, Brimmer just making misstep after misstep after misstep, just digging himself in deeper in an attempt to get himself out of trouble.
Especially because he should have realized, Kennicott even made a point of saying, I want to warn you, I have no intention of being patient. So Brimmer should have known that if there was no action from the police, that Kennicott would have called him, and that would have looked much better for him than him volunteering to say, hey, can I help you out?
Again, Brimmer playing checkers, not playing chess.
Right.
I don't know what he's doing. But yeah, so that scene was great. So Columbo's asks to read palms, which was really just to get a look at Brimmer's hand to see if he had a ring on his finger. And then he walked into a closet. So question, do you think he walked into that closet on purpose? That's a tough call.
I'm going to have to admit that's a tough call. I know my baseline premise is Columbo does everything on purpose, but I have to say that's one that I don't know that he knew that was a closet, because it does look identical to the door. It really does. So I'm thinking 50-50 on that. I'm thinking possibly he really did walk in on accident, but him being him and being so observant, he didn't take him but seconds to look at that set of clubs and realize something funny was going on. He knew right away those were ladies' clubs.
Correct.
So he asked anyway.
So let's sum up what Columbo knew before leaving that room. He knew that Culp, or Brimmer, I should say, inserted himself into an investigation that really had no point in being involved in.
Right.
As a private security and detective agency firm.
Yep.
He knew that Culp wears a ring on his left hand.
Yep.
And he knows that Lenore has golf clubs both at home and at a club, and it's a relatively new hobby she's taken up.
And that the club she has at the golf club is at a different place than she plays. So she takes lessons.
That's
he
right.
knew that she takes lessons at a different place than the place she plays. So yes, I think that's all good to put pins in those and to realize that. And he also knows from that same scene that she wears glasses.
Right.
So there was a lot that he gathered in what couldn't have been more than 5 minutes in that room.
Right. That was an important 5 minutes for Columbo. And a detrimental 5 minutes for Brimmer. And I think Brimmer knew that. I have to say, like you said, to give Brimmer credit, he's not stupid. So I think he knew that he was going to have to find a way to finesse Columbo to become on his side.
At the very least, he knew that Columbo is not the buffoon he thought he was 30 seconds ago.
Right, when he was reading his palm.
Yeah, when he went from, you got a Mount of Venus and Apollo, and so he went from smirking to, this guy is not an idiot. So that was the fastest this guy is not an idiot maybe in any episode.
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess if we had nothing more about the house, then he moves on to the tennis pro, because the moment he found out about that was the very next thing he did, was to go see the tennis pro. And we know he's there because we see him thumbing through his appointment book completely illegally.
Yes, completely legal. Yeah, he's in the golf pro shop, and he walks back in from a lesson with another like cha lesson. Right. Because this golf pro is no golf pro. I mean, he's a golf pro, but he's just, your everyday handsome man. And
well, he admits he's not even that good at golf. Later on.
So this golf pro was, of course, who Lenore was having an affair with.
Right.
And he was already, when we first meet him, he's giving a lesson to another very attractive woman, and she's sort of flirting with him. And, now we kind of get the idea that, okay, this is the one.
This is what he does.
This is what he does. He's just very charming and real tall, and he's got bell bottoms on, and,
he's very 1971 in shape too. because
Yes.
he's got some very slight muscles. He's got a small pot belly, but he's still very tall. He's got the curly hair and the polo shirt that's open.
This is a good-looking man.
Yes.
This is a good-looking man for 1971. Yes,
Yeah.
I would agree. And of course, everyone in 1971 looks just about 55 years old to me. But I think he probably was maybe like 27, 28. I'm not sure. I don't really know if they weren't juicing yet. I don't know what happened.
All right.
But yeah, so this is the guy. And he walks into his shop and he sees Columbo just looking through
his
his appointment book. Yeah.
Yeah. He completely. This is another time we're used to later on, and for most of the series, Columbo disarming people by making himself look dumber than he is or more incompetent than he is. But this time it was neat because it was one of the few times that he disarms somebody by showing him how superior he is at something. Because he says, "Hey, could you teach me?" He picks up a golf club and says, "Oh, what is this?" I mean, literally, what is, he says,
What is
it's a one wood, like he doesn't know, like anybody, even if you'd never played golf, you would know that that's a one wood. That's like the most basic club on earth. And so he says, "Well, could you give me a lesson?" They go out. And the pro starts to hem and haw. Ken Archer is the pro's character's name. He starts to hem and haw. And Columbo says, "Hey, look, don't say anything more. You don't have a lawyer." And he's being he's kind of a serious tone. It's not very bad serious cop tone, but it's, hey, this is a serious matter tone. Right. And he says, "Don't say anything more. I don't know anything about golf, but I know a lot about my business." And then, of course, he hits like a 500-yard shot off the tee, beautifully leveled, goes right on the fairway. Okay. And he hands him the club back and says, "Well, I don't know. Never mind the rest of the lessons. I can't learn how to play this game, but I'll come back and talk to you later." And the last scene is the tennis pro just looking off at the golf shot, bewildered.
Right. He's probably never hit a shot like that in his entire career.
Right.
As a golf pro.
As a golf pro. Because he says, "I'm not," later on, he says, "I'm not that great a golfer." Right. But I'm trying to think. I don't think there was anything else much with the golf pro. This is a pretty efficient episode. Each scene just kind of went along very quickly, and each scene did have a lot of interesting and good information in it. Right. But it was an interesting side of Columbo that we don't get to see a lot, that he basically disarmed him in the other direction.
Well, he was intimidating. Yes. And certainly I would say near the end of the run of Columbo, you never saw that. Right. But in the beginning, you would see hints here and there of him being intimidating. But like you said, it wasn't quite a strong arm I wouldn't say that. But he was definitely saying, "Hey, keep your mouth shut. Right. You don't have an attorney, and let me show you that this is all," like everything you just said, that he's very serious. So
just like, hey, this is his way of saying, "Don't say anything till you get a lawyer," is also his way of saying, "I know that you just lied to me." And,
right. Yes.
Shut up, because I know you lied to me. And so it kind of almost spurs him into making a break for it.
Yes.
Next, we go back to Bremer's office. Columbo uses an excuse of bringing some files to show up at the office, but it was mostly an elaborate way for Columbo to figure out if Bremer was left-handed or not.
Right, because I guess the sort of the highlight of that scene, or the climax of that scene, I should say, is that Columbo asks Bremer to sign a document, to sign off on the fact that he delivered the files, the receipt, and Bremer signs with his left hand.
Yep.
And then, Columbo calls him out on that, right? They just had a whole conversation about how the murderer must be left-handed because of the odd-shaped mark on Lenore's cheek. Yeah. So she was struck with someone who must be left-handed. He switches hands and shows that he is ambidextrous, which is kind of a throwback to the very, very first scene. Right. It kind of explains why he's shooting with two guns, because I don't think people would ordinarily do that unless they're just a show-off, or if they're having fun, which I maintain I don't know why he wasn't having fun doing that.
I mean, every once in a while, and I know this dates me terribly, but it should. I'm old, but I would, when I would go to an arcade that had gun games, I would sometimes put in 2 quarters and I would dual wield the guns. So I would shoot with both guns, and it is a lot of fun. So there's no reason why he should have been frowning while doing that. But yes, 2 things about it. One, when he was signing with his left hand, because Dad's left-handed, so we know what it looks like when somebody who's actually left-handed writes. You don't just look like you're a right-handed person writing with your left hand, and that's what Culp was doing. He was just kind of writing with it. If you see somebody left-handed, the paper is turned like 3/4 around, and it's
and
just
their arms like crooked all around it.
yes, because they have to. Well, they have to see what they're writing. So if you're writing with your left hand, you're going to be writing over your letter. You're not going to be able to see what you're writing. So it's funny because that was somebody's idea of what somebody who's left-handed writes like, but it's not. Is not. But okay, for the purpose of the audience, we know he's ambidextrous.
Yes.
That doesn't change the fact that he still can do things with his left hand, so it doesn't change anything.
Agreed. Completely.
Now, one thing that I thought was neat that I only saw maybe the past couple of times I saw this episode was when we get to how Columbo knows that the killer was left-handed, is he talks about how the killer would most likely not punch but would have slapped her.
Yes.
And he demonstrates on Brimmer with his right hand.
Correct.
And he goes to slap him, and Brimmer doesn't flinch.
I wrote that down. Brimmer does not flinch.
He doesn't flinch, but when Brimmer says, oh, the killer has to be left-handed, so he'd hit her like this, and he goes to slap at Columbo, and Columbo flinches. So
he more than flinches. He like completely jumps back. Yeah, he moves. He moves out of that way.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure even what that means, except that I guess Brimmer was certain that Columbo wouldn't actually strike him, and Columbo maybe wasn't so sure that Brimmer wasn't going to strike him.
I think,
or maybe to try and make him seem more vulnerable.
I think it's also an element of control that Brimmer is just always in control.
Right.
He's just so tightly wound. He's always in control.
Yeah.
And he's in control of his person, and so he's not going to have to move out of the way. He's not going to. You're not going to catch him off guard. He's measured. So and Columbo is just all not any of those things. So I think that's like emotion versus non-emotion. However you want to put it. Yeah.
But it was a clear distinction between the two reactions of those men. So at that point, I think we now go back. I think we flip back now to the tennis pro that he catches at night. Is that correct?
Yes. So what happens is the golf pro, is his name Ken?
I said tennis golf pro. Yes, that's right. Okay. It was Ken. Yeah. Ken.
Okay. So Ken is now frantically packing up and go. Does he live at the golf pro shop? Why is he packing up at the golf pro shop?
I thought that was kind of interesting. My assumption wasn't that he was packing up so much as he was getting everything he needed from the golf pro shop on his way home to pack up and get out of there.
Okay, so that's fair.
Because it was a little too late in the day for him to just be closing up. So I'm thinking maybe he already packed and just stopped off at the golf pro shop to get whatever he left there.
Okay. So but in either case, he's in a mad dash to get out of Dodge. I mean, he's going to go on the run.
Yeah.
And he's just going to go break hearts across this nation and go on the lam.
He's going to get his own 1970s guy wandering from town to town TV show.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of like
Kind
of like The Fugitive, except that instead of being a doctor, he's just a bad golf player.
He's just a bad golf pro. So he's packing up to leave, and Columbo just sort of intercepts him.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because Columbo's sitting in his car.
Yeah.
And so when the guy comes to the car, I don't know if this was an acting choice or a directing choice, but he didn't know Columbo was in the car until he sat down and looked to his right.
Yes.
But if getting into a two-seater, you're going to see somebody in the other seat. He should have probably seen Columbo there and said, oh, okay, and then dejectedly got in the car instead of getting in the car and going, what?
Yeah, he was a little surprised by it. Also, maybe that's why he's so bad at golf, because he has no peripheral vision.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe that's right. He can't see out of his right eye. I hadn't taken that into account. So, of course, at that point, we find out that not only were the golf pro and Lenore being followed, which, of course, we already know that, but while he's telling us about how they were being followed, they are right now being followed. By one of Brimmer's men who is following them and reporting back to Brimmer, who I think, as you had said earlier, even in his sleep, he just can't help but talk through clenched teeth.
Oh, man. He is a guy. he's just so angry all the time. He does walk around. There's a scene where he walks just from his car to the office, and his teeth are clenched.
Yeah.
His haircut looks angry. Like everything about him just exudes anger, you know?
Yes, it was very well done.
Yeah.
And but he kind of is always that way. So I don't know if that's probably just his acting style, but it was particularly well suited for this really tightly wound man.
Yes.
So now we have the full out desperate attempt to get Columbo off the case by showing him a tour of the place. I mean, there was a scene where he gets rid of an important witness, but that's really not all that important. That's part of what he was,
Well, what happened was that when Columbo and the golf pro were being tailed, the person that was tracking them called Brimmer, and Brimmer then realized, okay, let me get rid of this witness who is my star detective. Leo is his name.
Yep.
And so he sends him out of the country.
Yes.
Right. So now we're at the next scene where Columbo has a meeting with Brimmer again, but before that meeting can begin, he's given a tour by Boy Wonder,
Mr. Denning.
Mr. Dennings, the office gossip. He should just have his hair in rollers and have a big old coffee cup and a house coat, because this guy spills the beans left and right and tells Columbo all of the company's secrets.
I mean, it's just amazing. We're going to go through a list of all the things he tells.
I love it.
Well, but it starts. One important Columbo character building moment is he says, "Hey, walk through this gate," and and he does, and nothing happens. And he says, "Well, wait, aren't you carrying a gun?" And he says, "No." So we just find out that Columbo does not carry a gun. So we find that out. So that's a little nice Columbo building moment. And then Columbo's impressed. He's like, "Oh, it's just like the airport," when he said that if you walk through the gate, it would buzz. But that leads to the first gossipy moment where he says, do you have a need for that? And Denning just says, "Oh, well, we don't normally, but you never know. We had this one unassuming guy and we thought he was fine. And he worked for an accounting firm, and he names the firm, and he just starts doing everything but naming the guy." Yeah. And that's when Brimmer yelling at Denning to not say all the very highly personal, confidential information about a client of theirs.
Mr. Denning, I asked you to show the lieutenant around. I did not suggest that you discuss our confidential matters with anyone. At any time. Our clients pay us to be discreet. Yes, sir.
So, yes, he got yelled at, but it was perfectly reasonable. That's a terminal offense. I mean,
I would immediately, I was going to say, so Dennings is in the middle of telling Columbo. Dennings reminds me of it's like his first play date with his best friend. So he's like, "Come see my room. Let me show you about this. Gun surveilling thing. Oh, look, here are all our cars. Yay." Yeah. And that's how he's acting with Columbo. And Columbo's like, "All right, yeah, show me more. What's his social security number?" Like everything. And then Brimmer very rightly walks in the middle of Dennings telling Columbo about this client, and he does yell at him. I actually think that it was very warranted. I've been yelled at worse for less by bosses. Yes. And he should have been immediately fired.
I mean, that's definitely a you're fired on the spot type. Yes. I mean, their whole business is confidential, and it's just like,
don't forget the whole point of the blackmail, right? If we're going to really think about the entire point of the blackmail is that, yes, this is a detective agency and and they provide security as well. But really, he wants to trade in secrets with important men to climb, to elevate him. When him and Columbo first meet at Arthur Kennicott's home, he's name dropping the commissioners. He's obviously out and about as an LA socialite. Well, I guess not a socialite, but
no, but that's a good point. I'd forgotten about that. That he said, "I spoke to the commissioner. He speaks highly of you to Columbo." So that was letting Columbo know that I'm important enough to speak to your boss, and your boss flattering you looks well upon you, It's like, well, who the hell is he, but the fact is he definitely made himself more important. So yes, back to your point about how he wants this information from powerful people, and information is power.
Yeah, information is power, and he wants to, trade in secrets, and you have to be very strategic. He's, again, not really strategic, let's be honest. But he has to be very strategic to do so. And then he hires Dennings, who's just like, look at these cars. Want to see me shoot a gun? Like, that's my impression of this guy. He's my favorite in the entire episode. So, yeah,
Yeah.
so he yells at him, doesn't
Yeah.
fire him, takes the
No.
meeting with Columbo.
Right. Yeah, no, his response is, I didn't want
Yeah.
you to tell all, that's,
Yeah.
but it's perfectly warranted. He should have shut
Again.
up.
Yeah.
So yes, he takes Columbo in, and they have an entire meeting that really comes down to Columbo again showing off all the information he got. He tells Brimmer, I know she had an affair. And by the way, hey, wouldn't this be a great motive for murder if somebody knew she had an affair and lied to her husband about it? You
Yes.
know, somebody who does the kind of work that you do all the time.
Right.
And so Brimmer's
And
response is,
yeah.
hey, would you like a job?
Yes. Are they eating in this scene? Is this a scene where
They
they're
are.
having lunch?
It's-
They're having like a fancy 1970s like
It's like
Clams Casino or Filet of
It's-
Soul or something.
It's sole. I can't remember what it is, but it's definitely a type of sole that looks like it's got cream on top.
This is why I love watching Columbo. Another reason why I love watching Columbo, because it's just like a window into the lavish lifestyle, because they're always dealing with very, very wealthy people.
Yeah.
So it's like the very lavish, wealthy lifestyle of people in LA and California in the 1970s, which is it's such like a great little time capsule to see like these big silver trays, and he has a butler in his office. He has a butler.
He has a butler in his office. They have a full service for two because he knew Columbo was waiting him for lunch. And a full service for two, wine glasses. I mean, it means that he has a dining table in his office. It's not like they took him to a different room that maybe would be set up for meetings with clients. This was his office that had this table of this multiple course meal of which Columbo takes 2 bites and of course agonizingly eats and then tries to tell him information and then makes him wait to say, hey, this is really good. Can I get the recipe for this? And so he just does that wonderful just torture.
It is torture. I have to say, he does torture Brimmer in this episode.
Yes, he does.
Well, you know what? Columbo is a man who knows how to play chess.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Columbo's playing 3D chess.
Yeah.
This guy's playing checkers and isn't quite sure if it's Chinese checkers or regular.
Right. He doesn't even know. He's like, is it tic-tac-toe? Is there a zero? Is there an O in the middle? What am I doing? I'm just going to yell at people.
You have to leave one peg at the end,
I love the peg game.
So, of course, he springs on Columbo. Hey, how'd you like to work for me? But if you did, the only thing is the Kennecott case isn't that important. I'll just put somebody else on that, and you got more important cases that I'd like you to do. Right. So he says he'd think about it. But now Columbo already knows a weak link when he sees one. Yes. So he's literally waiting outside Mr. Denning's door.
Yes, he is. Because it says Mr. Denning, it says his name on the door, which means that Dennings, again, how does this agency get to the height that it is? If Dennings is such a shining star that he gets a private office with his name on the door, and he just spills the beans.
He was certainly depicted as one of his right-hand man. He was the one who was running down, important reports right out of the shooting gallery from the very beginning. So here's a list of what he spills. So he almost spilled an important client.
Right.
But here's what else he spills. He spills that Mr. Brimmer has a bad temper. That is controlled most of the time, except when he loses his temper. Boy, look out.
Right.
He spills how much of a salary people get at that agency.
Yes.
He spills that this person, Leo, makes the most because he's our best agent.
Right.
And therefore, but he's out of town because, of course, Brimmer sent him out of town. But I can give you his address and phone number, which he proceeds to do. So these are all the things in a 5-minute meeting after, and that was all after he got screamed at publicly for telling too much information, and now he's giving out salary information. He's talking about other agents.
And the best part is he's like, listen, keep this between you and me. He says, don't tell my boss that I'm telling you this.
Brimmer,
so he knows it's wrong to do. So, and just substitute yourself and imagine somebody stopping by, even if it is a police officer, and then just asking all of that information. I'm sorry, volunteering all that information about your coworker.
Yeah.
And no one's showing up with a warrant. It's not, Columbo actually didn't ask any question other than, hey, does anyone else make a lot of money here? That's really all Columbo asked.
That's all he took. That's all it took to do.
And he gets Leo Gentry's home address.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how he gets out of it. His salary and his home address.
So, and of course, the very next thing we see is Columbo pushing Leo's kid on the swing.
We need to just stop for a second.
Yeah.
With Columbo pushing Leo's kid on the swing. Again, this is a scene that would only happen in 1971.
Right.
I don't think I'm going to say by 1987 or 88, if a grown man in a trench coat was pushing a small child that high on a swing when he's clearly not the father, I think all the parents on the playground would have something to say.
I think they would all surround him. I think he would have had to have taken out his badge a while ago.
And still
say,
why are you
way,
as a police officer pushing a small child?
Why aren't you just talking to his mom? What are you doing here? Right. Because again, that was a little menacing. And I have to say, even for 1971, I think it would be a little weird for somebody to be pushing somebody else's kid on a swing, especially when she knows that her husband does private eye work. Yes. For all she knows, I mean, he sure doesn't look like a cop. Maybe this was a mafia guy involved in a case that they were on or something.
I mean, he does look very disheveled.
Yeah.
I mean, he does not look like a professional person.
He certainly.
And again, so I guess the scene is that she leaves her son alone to go buy them ice pops, and she's gone for just probably a couple of minutes, and she comes back and she sees her son being pushed dangerously high on a swing by Peter Falk. Right. So that's what's happening.
And so the whole scene really just was him confirming that Leo's out of the country because,
so
again,
she spills wife and child. Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's another blabbermouth. No wonder, though, she actually makes a point to say that she is a blabbermouth, though, at least to her credit.
Yes. She at least knows she is one. She says, oh, he can't tell me anything about his job or it'll be all over town, which is a strange thing for a person to say about themselves, but it's very introspective at least.
Yeah.
I mean, basically saying,
look, I give her points for being self-aware.
Yeah, it's like, you know what? I'm kind of a loudmouthed idiot. That's.
It's like, I abandoned my child to buy ice cream, and now I will tell you where my husband is, so he doesn't tell me anything.
And by the way, is that a California thing? I have to wonder, because this isn't the first time that he talked about ice cream, but it was clearly ice pops. So I don't know if it was supposed to be ice cream.
Do you know what's so funny? I saw that too. It did stick out with me because it's like there are ice pops, and I don't know if it's a California thing.
Yeah, or if it was originally just in the script it was ice cream, but they had the props were ice pops.
You know what? We should pay attention to the Robert Culp ice cream episode where he dresses up as an ice cream man and see if he sells ice cream or ice pops and what the menu on the side of the truck is.
We'll have to try and do that. That's basically the only episode he did of the 3 in the original classics where he wasn't a blackmailer. So so we'll have to see. That was that moment. It really just confirmed that Leo was sent out of town by Brimmer.
And abruptly. It was abrupt.
Yes, that's right. Overnight. Yeah.
Right.
So not much longer to go, actually, because what he does next is once he remembers that Lenore was wearing glasses in the photo, he then, and this was kind of the Jessica Fletcher moment where he's at the DMV and the woman ahead of him says, oh, I should be able to see well because these are new prescriptions. And the DMV guy cuts her completely off, which is hysterical because they would do that because he wouldn't give a damn if she had glasses.
He's just like, next.
It's like, I got new prescription. Yeah, here you go. Here's your license. So then Columbo's
Columbo was there. Yeah, because he was there. And this is my favorite part, too. He's there because he needs to renew his license.
Right.
And he leaves in the middle because he has this sort of epiphany like, oh, my gosh, she wore glasses. Where were her glasses when we discovered her? That means he left and his license is going to expire.
That's right.
He didn't renew his license.
He didn't finish it up.
Drive around and still not have his license. He didn't fix his taillight or his signal. And and he's going to have an expired license.
He's going to have an expired license, and we already know in the later episode that he has an expired license for his handgun shooting studies, his tests, So he rushes back to Raymoland, and he says, basically, hey, where are her glasses? And that's when Raymoland says that she got contact lenses instead of glasses shortly after that picture was taken. Columbo is briefly dejected, but then he looks through her artifacts at her contact lens case, and that's where he sees that they're empty, and we don't know it, but it's definitely the start of an idea for him.
Well,
And
yeah, I mean, because Kennicott said that she was getting a little vain, right? Isn't that what he said? So she stopped wearing glasses,
that's right.
and maybe she wanted to impress that golf pro.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, that maybe she was kind of having a little midlife crisis. She wanted to
herself.
Yeah. So, of course, this is now Columbo's last-ditch big attempt to try and catch Culp. So he plants the idea that if she wasn't wearing her contact lenses, or if their contact lenses weren't on her body, that it could have been at the murder scene. He gets Arthur Kennicott to sign permission to exhume the body, and again, he's being like, it wasn't a big fight. He just said, "Well, look, what do you need to get this murder solved? Okay, let's do it. You've got a blank check. Let's do it."
Yeah.
So they exhume her, and Columbo comes running back to the car. By which time, already Brimmer has joined them because
and he's late to join them because Kennicott doesn't tell him that the body is being exhumed, one. And two, when he does, he's got his informants. So when he does find out, he goes to take his car, his car won't start. So he has to tell the mechanic, because again, this is just, I must be like a multi-million-dollar agency. He's got an on-site mechanic, or a man who at least is managing his fleet of cars, I should say.
Well,
right?
No, that's what made this. That's why they had to do something. And when we talk about it in a few minutes, they make a point that this is definitely a separate entity, because I thought that too. I thought, oh, this guy's such a conglomerate, he even has his own mechanic. But this was just taking it to the shop. But he does. He
has an assistant take the car to the shop for him.
Yeah, basically that's kind of his chauffeur, for lack of a better description. That's his chauffeur, basically. Maybe he does kind of do light maintenance and keep the cars full of gas and that type of stuff. But yes, his own car won't start. So he gets another car, meets them at the grave site, basically, and meets up with Columbo. Columbo rushes back and says excitedly her right contact lens is missing. And that's when Brimmer just runs through a whole list of reasons why it could be, like she lost it in the coffin, or no, it wasn't in the coffin.
She could have lost it anywhere, is basically what he's saying.
Yeah.
And because Columbo said, he's saying, Brimmer's saying, this is really, it's like a desecration. Like, why would you do any of this? For what? It's fruitless. Right. And Columbo says, no, it could be found at the crime scene. He goes, right. Or it could be found here or here. And he lists every scenario that you could find it, because truthfully, they don't know where the crime scene is.
That's right.
Right.
They don't. And that's where Columbo does a next little mental torture thing where he says, yeah, we don't know where the crime scene is. You know what? I just wish that the killer knew about this contact lens, because he would then have definitive evidence that he would be at his place that he'd have to find before we do. Yes. And he basically might as well have said, you get it?
Yeah. He might as well have said, I just wish that the killer were here to do exactly what I want him to do. Brimmer, I'll see you at the beach house later so I can intimidate you some more.
So
that's what he's doing. I'm just going to stop by and do a little light torture before I ultimately catch you.
Yes. Yes. So, and that's basically what he does, because he lets Brimmer have the time to run back to his house and search through that shag carpet that's now back in the picture again.
So now he's on his hands and knees looking through that shag carpet, which is like,
with the flashlight,
like 3 inches long. I mean, it's just such a big carpet.
It is. And what I thought was neat that I only caught this last time around was the picture on the wall was changed, because of course he was thrown into it and it was broken, and I just realized it was a new one.
That's right.
So Columbo comes by, and I'm absolutely going to have to put it in here, the doorbell that is used in almost every episode of Columbo where somebody wealthy has their doorbell rung. That bing, bong, bong. It's in Lady in Waiting.
I have to pay attention. I that flew right over my head.
I may have to just put that doorbell in every episode we do where that episode uses that doorbell, because it is just in every episode. If it's a wealthy person's house, they've got that doorbell. So Columbo is let in, and he immediately starts to torture him about the carpet, saying, oh, my wife would love this carpet. We need a new rug. This is so that you could lose a shoe in here for a week.
Well, Columbo stops by. Yeah, Columbo stops by while Brimmer is now he knows Brimmer is going to be frantically scouring his entire apartment to find one contact lens. One teeny tiny contact lens. And then Brimmer, to his credit, gets himself together, answers the door, is very measured once again, is flustered but doesn't show it.
Right. And the pretext for him to come over is to decline the job offer that he was made earlier.
Right. So he's going to stop by to do that in the middle of the night.
Right. Because that's what
instead
you
of just picking up a phone call,
right.
Or maybe just
at his beach house, which, by the way, why would Columbo assume he'd be at his beach house instead of his actual house?
And then Columbo points out, says, "Hey, you're neighbors with with the Kennicotts. Did you know that?"
Well, what was funny is that Columbo said, "Oh, you're." This was earlier in the episode, but he said, "Oh, you're very close to your neighbor," and Brimmer says, "No, we're a mile apart." And he said, "That close, huh?" So completely ignoring his attempt to make a mile seem far apart.
Right. So he shows up, declines the job, and then leaves. And now Brimmer is still full on sweating it out, looking for this contact lens.
That's right. And so he realizes he must have searched the rug to his satisfaction at some point to say, okay, it's clearly not in the carpet where she fell.
Right.
It's probably in the trunk of my car, but now his car is at the mechanics. And that's what I didn't realize the first few times I watched it, that this was, and that was just something I missed, because they made a point of, like, if it was his, he could have just gotten in with the key, but they made a point of us showing him pick the lock. So this was clearly not an agency he owned. This was clearly breaking and entering.
Right. Yeah, he was breaking and entering to a mechanic's shop to access his car that wouldn't start earlier in the day. So he needed to get to his car.
That's right. And
to search for her contact lens.
So he gets in the car, gets in the trunk, physically gets in the trunk. He sits in the trunk and
Robert Culp's got to be like, what, 6'3"? I mean, he's a tall man.
He is tall. So he has gotten himself in the car, hunting around. He needed the valet from Suitable for Framing to help him out with that one. So
maybe he'll find a cufflink.
So he finds a contact lens.
Yes.
Gets out, slams down the trunk, and all the headlights in the room go on, the lights go on, and he sees that everybody who's been in this episode before, practically, other than propping up Lenore, that just everybody else who's in this episode is there.
Yeah.
And they, of course, confront him. Yeah. He says, "Oh, I was looking for papers," and Ray Milland's just like, no, you just admit it. You're looking in your trunk because you tossed Lenore's body in there. Ugh. And then he doesn't deny it. He says, "Okay, what's next?" It says, I guess, am I under arrest? Yes. Right. All right. Yeah. And then he walks away. And even then, he was cool enough and in control enough to take out a pack of cigarettes and put the contact in the cigarettes and try to toss it. But, of course, Columbo anticipated that and said, grab his wrist. They grab it. They see the contact is in there.
Yes.
And that's when there's the final kind of breakdown of the killer, where he says, he basically apologizes, like, I barely knew her, I didn't mean to kill her.
He did apologize. He said, "I'm sorry, Arthur." Yep. And he said, "I didn't actually, it was an accident, it wasn't premeditated." It's pretty much all he says to Arthur, and then Arthur walks away from him.
Yeah, he just walks away, just turns his back on him and walks away. And he's let out. I guess his last line is, "You should have taken that job," to Columbo.
Well, actually, in between that and the last line.
Well, I'm sorry, I meant Robert Culp's last line was.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Robert Culp says, or Brimmer says, "How did you know? When did you know?"
Okay. That's
Which is important because we always like to talk about
that's our thing. So yes, you're absolutely right. He kind of answered that.
He did it for us. So, yeah.
So we'll answer it for us later. But yes, no, you're absolutely right. He did, because I was thinking when he said that, I'm like, oh, well, there's our answer right there.
Yeah, because I was going back and thinking, exactly. And
then, of course, a really wonderful bit to close the episode is that Ray Milland says, "Wow, what would have happened if her lens didn't fall out?" And Columbo says, "Well, no, that's not her contact lens. She had both lenses. The coroner told me at the gravesite that both the lenses were on her when she died." So that always leads me to wonder, did he plant a contact lens in there?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
he literally
I
says,
think
I
so.
don't know where. Okay.
Look, there's two ways to take it. Because Arthur Kennicott asks him, well, then whose lens was that? And he goes, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, it could be, it's a little open-ended. It could be planted or it might not be planted.
Right.
But he
It would
doesn't
just be,
but Columbo doesn't confirm. He was just saying it actually doesn't even matter. It's let me just
Right.
dismiss this outright because of his behavior and his confession.
Right. And that is true.
However, and that is true. However, I don't know. It doesn't look so good. There's a little questionable police tactics in this episode.
I was gonna say, the one is one thing, but does that mean that there was just a contact lens in this guy's trunk for some reason? He doesn't wear them. He wears glasses. So that was really strange. I almost have to think he planted it just so that Kennicott could get caught trying to throw it away. But I don't know, and I guess that's one that we'll probably never really know.
Right.
But of course, then Kennicott asks him, say, "Oh, gee, what would have happened if his car started just fine? We couldn't have set up this trap."
Yes.
And Columbo tells a delightful little story about how when he was younger, he and a bunch of his friends, a bunch of real wild guys, so so wild that their idea of a prank is to take a potato, stick it in the tailpipe. It doesn't damage the car, but it won't start.
Right.
And of course, Ray Milland, again, being a wonderful actor, he kind of smiles and then he thinks for a moment and then he turns to look at the car.
At the tailpipe.
And then he takes a step toward it.
Yep.
And then he changes his mind, puts his hands in his
Right.
pockets, and casually walks away.
Because
and
it doesn't matter. Because none of it matters.
That's right.
It doesn't matter anyway. Yeah.
Because they caught the guy that killed his wife, and that's all that really matters.
That's all he needed. That's all he needed. And that is how that episode closes. And then the credits start. Yeah, it's a great. This is my all-time favorite episode.
I have to say it's easily in my top 3. It's definitely a great episode. It's just so well acted. It again incorporates a lot of the fun Columbo elements with him. Really even getting in a little bit of golly gee in there, but without not a lot of it. And so I think we'll just move on to when did Columbo know?
Right, and that's what I was saying earlier because Brimmer outright asked him that question, and Columbo outright answered. And he said, as soon as I saw that you had a ring on your left hand, right? That was it.
Yeah, he basically said you never should have let me read your palm because that's when I felt that you had the 2 diamonds on the raised rectangular ring.
Which is an unusual pattern, basically, of a ring. What Columbo was really saying is basically you should have never met me because the second I met you, I knew you did it.
Yes.
So this is a nice and tidy one because there's no debate, and they answered it for us.
There's no debate. They literally asked and literally answered it within the episode, and it's fair because he was honestly kind of without any kind of clue or lead, and then the moment he met him, he was like, oh.
Right, and and like you said, because this is one of the very maybe a handful of episodes where this is not a premeditated murder. It is a little sloppy. Right. And there is a lot for him to sort of clean up. And there is an element of being desperate and kind of being in a panic. And, you really are Brimmer's now put in the position of trying to clean up rather than methodically plan. So, that is going to how it's going to go.
Well, and also, we didn't really talk about it, but because he owns the detective agency who is supposed to be investigating this crime as well, he spent a good part of his time investigating by sending his men on wild goose chases, by telling them information to follow up that was meaningless, to throw people off the track. So
that's true. I mean, he held an entire meeting. I love that scene where he holds an entire meeting where he's got like the map of the area and then the camera. It's such a clever camera trick, but he has the camera is shooting that scene from behind the sort of the whiteboard, so you see the mirror image of the map of the area that they're looking, I guess, of LA or whatever. And he's holding a whole meeting. He's basically telling everybody, look, this is a robbery, this is random, there's been a lot of vagrants in the area, go out, question all these vandals, question all these
bums,
find these bums, and you're right, now he's spending just countless hours trying to throw everyone off his trail.
He's being hired to find himself at this point. So that was when Columbo knew. So now it's time for our sympathy meter, and this one's a little dicey. This one's a little dicey because I don't. Did you want to go first on this one?
It's a scale from Ruth Gordon to Dick Van Dyke.
I have this dream, Francis. I'm working. There's a phone call, and he says, terribly sorry, but your wife's dead. And then I always wake up, and I want to cry because you're still alive.
This is very difficult because he, as a person, I don't find him sympathetic. I don't find this murder particularly vicious. I don't think we know he didn't intend to kill her. Right off the bat, we witnessed it. He displayed true remorse about killing Lenore at the end when he apologized to Arthur.
Yes.
And so I having said all that, his personality is such, he's so measured and so full of just control, and he just works so hard on himself to be in control at all time. You don't really see a lot of his personality other than anger and control. So he's not a sympathetic person. He's not a warm person. There's murderers in this series who have committed horrendous crimes, horrendous murders, and I feel more sympathetic towards them than I do him. So this was a tough call for me. I'm going to land him in the middle because he's not a ruthless person. He made a horrendous mistake. He killed somebody. He did the wrong thing. He did the wrong thing again, made matters worse, and was just in self-preservation mode. So I'm fairly sympathetic to that in the world of Columbo, but he himself as a character wasn't warm. It didn't really care about him. Or his welfare.
I think I'm also falling toward the middle, maybe for slightly different reasons, but also similar. Like, for example, he brought this completely on himself. Yes. So her being dead is still 100% his fault and didn't have to happen. He also, and we'd said this about other people too, he had a lot to lose if she left that room alive. Yes. On the other hand, that was also 100% his fault too.
All his doing. She was not blackmailing him.
That's right.
He was threatening. She had more to lose. Look, she had more to lose than he ever did.
Yes,
absolutely. She was going to lose an empire that she was married to.
Yeah.
So she fought fire with fire.
And you can bet that if she thought that Kennicott had gotten mad enough that he could have destroyed her if he wanted to.
Yes.
I think we know as an audience he wouldn't have.
Correct.
But because he did truly love her. But she knows that was a risk that she was willing to take, was that he was going to not just divorce her, but probably destroy her.
Yes.
The only bit of sympathy I have for him is that he didn't mean to kill her. That this was not something he had intended to do. And that's probably the only reason why I would even put him in the middle instead of 3/4, is just that he didn't mean to do it.
Right.
It happened because of him.
Yes.
But it was really trying to clean things up and not intended. So
I don't think he's a murderer. I don't think he would have. I don't think he murdered before. I don't think he would have murdered again.
Right, because he didn't even technically murder this time. This was more like manslaughter, really. But she's just as dead. And then instead of just going to the police, and this is where even the other people who don't actively commit murder on purpose, instead of just saying, hey, this is what happened, I'm going to the police, I didn't mean to kill her, he then tried to cover it up.
Well,
and that possibly would have gotten a couple of innocent, homeless people probably sent to jail over it.
I mean, that's not great. I mean, it was, he had his little fancy lifestyle. He wanted to eat his
soul.
He wanted to eat his Clams Casino, his soul. I'm trying to think of other, like, Cherries Jubilee. What else did people eat in the 70s that were fancy? Like Baked Alaska. Yeah. Right? Like, so, because I can't get over the fact that he had a personal butler in his office serving multiple course lunches. That wasn't even dinner. That was like a lunch.
That was
anyway, yeah. So he had everything to lose, and everything comes down to money and power, I think, and that's the world he was in, and it was going to all tumble, and it was all his doing, and he lost his temper, and he killed her.
And he lost his temper, and so that's why I would also put him at half, because I can't give him any more sympathy than that, but I also can't really condemn him much further than that either.
Right. Okay.
So
fair.
I think we're in agreement there. So I guess now we would ask, will this hold up in court?
Tell me, Doctor, how do you catch a man like that?
You don't.
You're probably right.
And this one's a
Yeah.
little tricky. I'm going to
Oh, I
confess
don't think
right
it's
now.
tricky. Yeah.
I'm going to confess right now that my default is Columbo catches everybody always. But
Yes.
I have to understand there is some times where it really may not necessarily stand up in court. Well, I guess, because you went first in the other, you should probably go first on this one too, if you want to.
Oh, yeah, sure. I think this would immediately get thrown out of court. I don't
Okay.
think this would hold up at all. I think that the confession would be tossed out immediately. I think that it was a weak confession. I think that I went back and I listened to it a couple of times, it really wasn't even a confession. It was more of an apology. The most damning thing that he said was that this wasn't premeditated. That was it.
Right.
So I think it's a weak confession, one. Two, I think we just witnessed entrapment. I know that police officers have a lot of license to lie to people during interrogation. And so Columbo certainly did that. He explicitly said that the contact lenses were not on Lenore's person when they were. I think that that's probably all allowed. But look, this is the great potato incident of 1971. He shoved a potato in a tailpipe. We know that's what he did, even though he didn't admit to it. We know, he's saying it with a wink and a smile. So Columbo dismantled the car essentially. So it would force the situation to which that the car would now be out of Brimmer's possession. So he'd have to go to a mechanic's office where they could set up a sting. So I think that could be grounds for, maybe you could argue entrapment for that, and quite possibly planted evidence, which is definitely illegal, where he planted a contact lens in the trunk of her car. So circumstantial evidence, sure. Is he going to get convicted? I don't think so. I think that this is a weak case. I think if you want to play like real world scenario, I think because the Kennicott figure is so important, they're gonna get him arrested and put away in jail. Right. But I think in terms of legality, this isn't going anywhere in court.
Well, okay, so I got to disagree.
Okay.
I think that it will stick, but weakly.
Okay.
He did confess. He said he didn't just say it wasn't premeditated. He said it was an accident. It wasn't premeditated.
Right.
So he's admitting that he's responsible for her death. So
you're putting words in his mouth.
Well,
if I were an attorney, I would say you're putting words in his mouth.
Well, if you're saying I'm sorry, and if you're saying it was an accident, it wasn't premeditated, you're saying that you did it. So for me, I think maybe weak, but he did still say, he maybe didn't say I killed her, because he definitely didn't use those words. I know that. Right. But he certainly said I'm responsible for her death, however you want to look at that.
Yeah, okay.
All right, little weak there. But I am going to have a hard time believing you could convince a jury that there was any good reason why he would actually break into a mechanic's garage, get into the trunk of his car, find a contact lens, and try and throw it away when he knew that a contact lens was exactly what could get him in trouble. And I know you could say entrapment. I think Columbo was probably smart enough to take the potato back out of the tailpipe.
Yes,
so I don't think
we didn't have to see that. Yeah.
I don't think there's any evidence that that car was disabled. But even if it was, even if the car was disabled, an innocent man would not have broken into another place of residence. Like if they planted the seed but didn't disable the car, and he just went down to his own garage to look in his trunk, he would have had a lot of good reasons to look in the trunk of his car, including the papers. But the fact is, he chose to break into another person's place of business just to look into the trunk of his car. I think at the very least, if we want to go real world ish, I think he probably takes a plea to manslaughter or maybe murder 3 or something like that.
I think he's charged. I think if we're going to real world, I think he's charged with manslaughter, and he definitely pleads.
And he pleads less.
But I think I think anything about the contact lens would be thrown out. I don't think it could be used as circumstantial evidence at all. And then I think you would have to then, like you said, it would be, why were you breaking into a mechanic shop to break into your own car, essentially? Why were you doing that? And if the contact lens is thrown out, then you can say I'm looking for papers. Yeah, no, I definitely hear what you're saying. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and people do get put away on circumstantial evidence all the time.
Right.
So there is that.
Right. So, all right, we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
Yeah.
So I guess all that's left to say is thank you for listening to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast, and
Oh,
please
wait,
join.
wait. One more thing.
Oh, what's that?
I did a little investigation, and I couldn't remember if Columbo had this car in a previous episode, and this is the first time this is the first time we see Columbo with this car.
Oh, okay.
So I looked up information about the car because we talked about it a little bit, but the car is a full-on disaster. It is a jalopy. You don't even know how he's driving it. So I was like, and it is used sort of as a gag throughout the series that he's got this horrendous car. So not only is Columbo disheveled, his car is disheveled. It's barely functional. So I got a lot of information from columbosite.freeuk.com. It has a whole profile about his car. It's great. So it's a French car. I think it's pronounced Piaget. Piaget, does that sound right?
Why? I might have thought of Peugeot.
Peugeot makes more sense.
Yeah.
So it's a Peugeot 403, but it's from 1959 or possibly 1960. And this was filmed in 1971. So, I mean, it's a decade old, but it looks horrible.
Right.
And there's a cute little backstory about it. First of all, this car itself, there was only 500 ever made in France because it's such a spectacular failure, I guess.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that's why. But Levinson and Link decided when they were writing this episode, when they wanted Columbo's entrance, they thought it'd be great to have him in this dilapidated car. And they told Peter Falk about it, and he absolutely hated the idea. He said, wait a second, I have a lot of shtick. I already have a cigar. I have a rumpled trench coat. I have a wife. This is before he had the dog. But, he's got a lot of sort of props to make him just a
mess.
Deceptive mess, right? Or I guess he is a true mess. And he just thought it was a lot to fit his personality, and he was really, really resistant to it. And so Levinson and Link kind of were just like, look, just walk around the universe a lot, see if you can find anything. And the day before shooting, Falk found this car. Yep. So this is the car that they used, and this is the car that they used throughout the entire series.
That is very neat, and it is true that he chose it, and what it was doing on that lot in the first place, I think, deserves its own story. Why would that car be there? But it was, and he chose it, so that's great.
Yeah. So okay, so now we can end the podcast because that really was just like, again, my favorite episode, and we can.
One more thing.
Oh yes.
So we touched on it a little bit, but the main kind of thread of this episode was that Robert Culp's character Brimmer is running an investigative agency that is searching for him.
Yeah.
And, we know that, but nobody in the show knows that. Well, and Ray Milland was, of course, a major character in this episode, but Ray Milland starred in a movie called The Big Clock in 1948, starring Charles Lawton as a newspaper magazine mogul and Ray Milland as an investigator. And what happens in the movie is that Ray Milland spends an innocent night out with Charles Lawton's mistress. Okay. Charles Lawton sees him leave, but he doesn't recognize him. He just knows somebody was with her, and in a fit of rage, he murders his mistress.
Okay.
So now Ray Milland was famous and working for Charles Lawton because of his ability to track down people nobody could track, including the police. Okay. So Charles Lawton basically instructs him to find the guy that was with her so he could pin her murder on that guy. So Ray Milland spends almost the entire movie sending his men on wild goose chases and trying to track himself. He's trying to find himself. And if you can find it, it's a great movie. It's a definite film noir, but it's a lot more comical. It isn't on the level of the Maltese Falcon, which is much more serious, even with some comedic moments. But there are some points where it's almost a screwball comedy where...
Really?
Yes, where an artist witnesses him with the woman, and so they bring her in so that she can draw a picture of the person who was with her that night. But she realizes that Ray Milland is the only guy who's been buying her artwork, so she paints an abstract picture instead, so they couldn't possibly use it to identify. So it's a really good movie. I highly recommend it. I think it's for free on some old noir television services, but I thought that was neat that was clearly either an homage to Ray Milland or they had that idea. I don't know if they just flat out stole it. I don't know, but it was certainly too much to be a coincidence that Ray Milland would have starred in that movie and then he would have been in this episode.
That's pretty great, actually.
So.
I love that. Oh, that's great.
So before we go, just like to say thank you for listening to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Rumpled Trenchcoat, which would be at Rumpled T, or on Instagram at Rumpled Trenchcoat, all one word, or Patreon at Richard Nocella is creating Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast. So thank you again for joining us, and join us next time when we talk about Suitable for Framing. And until next time, keep that trench coat rumpled.
Rich, come on. Stop.
All right. Well, we're still working stuff out.
We gotta work that. We gotta do a little bit better than that.
I think maybe we can do something a little better than that.
All right. We'll
I would count on it though. But this has been Rich Nocella and my sister
Adrian Nocella.
And we will see you next time. Goodbye, folks.
Bye.
Okay.